Hello, I'm Enzo, and this is part 2 of my Minecraft Compact Claustrophobia run. If you haven't watched the first part, I heavily recommend you do because you will be very confused on what's going on right now. Anyways, I left off right before I started making cubic boron nitrate, and that's where I'll start this video. So, I was going to explain it last time, but my audio got corrupted. But anyways, I thought the process was more difficult, but it's really not. Just making the machines is super annoying. To start off, I built an electrolyzer and supplied it with water. This gives us hydrogen, which we need for this process, but also oxygen and deuterium, which will come in handy later. I also melted up a bunch of boron, and I need that molten boron to react with the hydrogen to make diborane. Diborane in water gives us boric acid and some of our hydrogen back. I think it actually gives us way too much hydrogen, which is very useful because I need hydrogen and some nitrogen that I built a collector for, and it's been collecting for a while, to make ammonium. And if you couldn't guess, the boric acid and ammonium react together to make the boric nitrate solution I've been going for this whole time. However, that's not the entire end of it. I still have to put that into a crystallizer to get the actual dust, and finally into a pressurizer to get the finalized crystal. Yeah, this process isn't nearly as bad as I remember, and it's pretty easy to automate, but I didn't do that for a while. The cubic boron nitrate plus our hop graphite dust, not the ingots, gives us Desh. This is awesome because this gets us way closer to getting diamonds. The only issue is that Desh pickaxe costs 7 Desh to make, because you also have to make the sticks for it, which is just stupid. The best thing about getting a Desh pickaxe, though, is the fact we get mini coal, not actual coal. That makes getting the coke coal and eventually hop graphite dust way easier, because currently I can either use the coke furnaces or use this special augment. The issue with this augment is you need actual coal, which I can technically get by manufacturing charcoal into charcoal dust, then graphite dust, then pressurizing that into coal, but that's a whole very power expensive process, and the furnace is much cheaper. So anyways, yeah, I'll be here for a while until I get enough hop graphite dust to make Desh. After a bit of waiting, I finally get to make my Desh pickaxe. This gives us access to a few new things. Like I said, the tiny coal to make coal, platinum, iridium, which is absolutely useless, but most importantly, hopstitute carbon fibers. Now, these are one of the most important things in the run because it makes the hop graphite ingots infinitely easier and, well, cheaper to produce. But we're gonna need a ton of these, so I'm gonna have to throw this in the auto miners. My power situation is still horrible, but I wanted to show off these hop carbon fibers and what they do. With 9 of the fiber and 1 dust, you get 9 hop ingots. Well, that's what should be happening, but like I said, I don't really have the power to process that right now. Since accidentally clicking the walls and filling up your inventory with stuff you don't want is always an issue, I decided to make some tools using some of the cubic boron nitrate I made. The nice thing about these is that they make the spaxel hoe, or whatever it's called, which is a multi-tool. It functions as every single tool and a weapon. It's just amazing to have, and it has a ridiculous durability. While I was working on part 2 here, I got a comment that said something about this augment, so I decided to check it out, and yeah, it's literally like mending, but with XP. So maybe I could have used this for the early Desh pickaxes, but I heavily doubt it for the later ones because I have no clue how I would automate this system, and I needed so much XP in the end game anyways. But that's just something to think about. Because Desh pickaxes are so difficult for me to get right now, I made an enchantment table so that I could hopefully make my pickaxe better with unbreaking. But for some bizarre reason, I accidentally took efficiency, even though unbreaking was literally like the first thing I found. My brain clearly was not working right here. I really should have just gone for a guaranteed unbreaking instead of a level 3 efficiency. Or, level 3 enchantment that has efficiency 1. So that's annoying, but I've learned my lesson now. To partially solve this annoying issue, because I don't want to make a ton of books for bookshelves, because that's expensive, I built this arcane ensorcellator. I hope that's how you say it. Anyways, you give this a book, the material, and essence of knowledge, or the liquid experience. The material in this case is obsidian, which gives us unbreaking. This gives us a way to get guaranteed unbreaking books. The only issue is it costs 4 books for an unbreaking 3 book, because it only gives you tier 1 of each enchantment, which is the only thing I don't like about this. I wish you could spend more materials and XP to get an unbreaking 2 or 3 of your choice. A while later, I finished another 9x9 room, and this is where I'm going to place yet another one of the miniaturization fields, but this room has an important purpose. See, I've been getting very sick and tired of copying and pasting the ender pearls. I want to finally automate that, and to do that, I'm going to need a ton of stuff. Before I can really work on that project, though, I have a major power issue. Power is always an issue in this run, but it's extremely bad right now, so I really have to fix it. And my only option right now is to increase the size of my reactor, which means a ton of annoying and expensive nuclear craft material, including cryolithium coolers because I have a ton of cryolithium now. I only managed to make around a stack and a little bit of reactor casings, which means I can't make a super large reactor like I want, but this is definitely an improvement over the old one. I made a checkerboard pattern of coolers and cells, but my cooling is so crazy I can use a good portion of fuels at this rate. Well, because of, the cheats and everything. But this power will be a great help either way because I am still really struggling. Especially considering I'm using the arc furnace 24/7, that is just a power annihilator. Since I've been crafting a ton of ender pearls, I put an entire stack into the magma crucible, which gives me 4 millibuckets, which isn't a crazy amount, but that'll give me 16 endurium, so it's 1 per ender pearl. That's still pretty disappointing, but this will let me make some new stuff, well, specifically new upgrades to make my gear a lot better. The main thing about ender pearl automation is the auto clicker. This is what uses the copy paste gadget to build the ender pearls. You can also link it to a chest, that's where I'm going to put all the obsidian and redstone, and boom, it works. The only thing, and I haven't really tested this, but I always make sure the placement is where the auto clicker is clicking so that it doesn't try to place it somewhere else and mess something up. This takes a little bit to get right, but I think it's worth it in the end. As you can see, and very likely hear, the ender pearl automation does work. And I need to place this vacuum later because it takes too long to make one and it'll right click again, even though I have it set at 0 power. It is slightly annoying, and I wish there was some sort of redstone control so I could time it just right, but oh well, I'll accept it either way. I've also prepared some crucibles and thorium blocks so that I can build a bunch of crucibles to, well, you could probably guess, automate obsidian, because that's what this thing is going to chew through. Even though I've had a ton in that chest, it's going through it very fast, so it's definitely going to need its own automation. Although this was definitely overkill. I should have also automated redstone somehow, and I should have figured it out later on too, but I made so many ender pearls by the end of this run, I didn't really need to automate too much more. I just manually supplied it with some redstone every so often. I cut most of it out because it took me forever to figure this out, but I made some simple automation that takes the copy-paste machine out of the auto-clicker when it doesn't have full power, and puts it into the energetic infuser, the thing that charges it, when it does need power. This is a simple bit of automation, and it uses some very cheap uranium RTGs, because it does not need that much power. And boom, now it's fully automated, except for the redstone. Because yes, the copy-paste machine does require power, and eventually if you don't automate the power to it, it will run out and your whole machine will just brick. A byproduct of that whole project is this little building called the timer. It's exactly what it sounds like. It sends out a redstone signal whenever you want it to. That gave me a great idea to kind of time how often the fission reactor would be active. This gives me an effective way to manage the amount of heat and power I produce. Even though I don't produce more heat right now, it'll still be useful to not produce as much power and waste all of my fuel. So that's handy. It'll be more useful later on, and I'm using this to activate the fission reactor from now on. Right now, I'm doing a ton of preparation for my next major project, and that's starting with this igneous extruder. It allows you to make pretty much whatever type of stone you want using lava and water. And that's important because I'm going to need a unholy amount of andesite, diorite, and granite for this run. Mostly andesite though, I believe, because I think that gives us sulfur. And sulfur is super important, like always throughout this run. I also made this neat augment for it, which makes it not require water, which is awesome, because now I don't have to get water for it. Even though I could have just gotten an infinite water source, this is still way easier, considering it goes pretty fast and this chest will fill up in a decent amount of time, especially considering I don't need all of that granite right now. I need these rocks to put into the rock crusher to get a bunch of important materials for my next few projects, and like I said, some very useful sulfur along the way. The third item on the right I think is literally useless, but it's the rhodocite, the red dust on the left that we want for the next thing. I also took a quick detour to make a fluid infuser. This lets us make blizz rods using blizz powder. Why is this important? Well, this gives us a way to profit and make more blizz powder without having to use liquid experience, which I'm going to be using to make unbreaking books. So that's awesome. And it gives us a use for oxygen, which doesn't have many uses otherwise. For the next multi-block structure, I need to make another item here in my lab, and I'm going to require an unholy amount of this stuff called crystal binder. Now, I have most of the parts, except for the calcium sulfate, which is the worst to get because it requires a ton of processes, just like the cubic boron nitride. To start the process, I've been using this fluid enricher, not the infuser, there is a difference, to make fluoride water with fluoride, which comes from rock crushing diorite, and obviously water. I also melted up a whole stack of sulfur, which gives me a ton of molten sulfur, and I need to combine that with oxygen. Yeah, I might have lied. Oxygen actually has a few uses. It's not entirely useless, but you do get way too much of it when you just constantly electrolyze water. Molten sulfur and oxygen gives us sulfur dioxide. Kinda makes sense, right? What also makes sense is when you put the sulfur dioxide back into a chemical reactor with more oxygen. That gives us sulfur trioxide. With that sulfur trioxide and an unholy amount of water, I had an entire tank for this, I get sulfuric acid, which is half of the equation to making our final product. If you haven't guessed it by now, we combine that sulfuric acid and the fluoride water from earlier to get hydrofluoric acid, which you get way too much of and is practically useless. I think it might have some nuclear craft stuff, but I just saved it for way later. And most importantly, our calcium sulfate solution. The last step is obviously putting it into the crystallizer to get the powder out. Thankfully, I don't have to pressurize it afterwards. But yeah, needless to say, I'll be here for quite a while doing this, because I need an unholy amount of this stuff. Now that I have a little bit of calcium sulfate, I can start making the crystal binder. It also requires obsidian and magnesium dust, which I have enough magnesium dust for now, and obsidian is obviously no issue at all. With this, I can start making the elite plating I need. But of course I also need boron ingots. And don't even get me started on the depleted uranium plating, which requires advanced plating, which is basic plating, and also uranium and sulfur, which are very annoying to get. Thankfully, I only need a few of these for now. It's gonna get way worse later. I thought I needed more of these, but it's advanced plating I need a ton of for now. So I'm gonna be here for a while, making a lot of those. Because I really don't want to make all of those advanced plating right now, I made another thing we're going to need for that fusion reactor, and that is cryostabilized flux ducts, which take a bunch of materials to make, but these things can transfer an infinite amount of power. However, they have no power capacity, so they can't hold any, like batteries. Well, all the other ducts do, just not these ones. Anyways, to make these, I'll need cryolithium, which isn't difficult because I have plenty of blizz powder now, and of course endurium, singulum, electrum, redstone, and more redstone. It just takes a while. It's not too difficult, because I have everything already. And as you can see, having an automatic ender pearl setup really pays off in the end. 8, almost 9 stacks of ender pearls. That is just beautiful. And now I can make even more endurium. Well, I've already been making a ton, as you can see, but I will always need more. Since making these cryo-stabilized flux ducts effectively removed some of my power storage capacity, I decided to make these voltaic piles. These are one of Nuclearcraft's batteries. They do have actual lithium-ion batteries, but those are so expensive because of the hard carbon ingots, so I can't really afford those right now. Also, Electric Avenue. I love that reference. Because these cost magnesium, and I'm going to use quite a bit of magnesium to make the crystal binder later on, I didn't want to make too many of these things, so I just stuck with an advanced one, which still gives us a ton of power capacity. It will have to have one input and one output, so it has to connect to 2 pipes, but still, that's what, 10 million RF? Or however much its capacity is? Still, it's nice to have a battery instead of just relying on the reactor's power storage. In part 1, I spoiled how I used the arc furnace to automate graphite dust, and here it is. It's just 2 manufactories, one to grind it down and one to process it into graphite dust. Pretty simple, but I'll need a ton of this stuff throughout the run, and it's great right now because I need to make basic plating to make advanced plating. Why do we need all of this advanced plating, you may ask? Well, because we need to make a full stack of fusion electromagnets. These servos are just copper and iron, which is extremely simple, but yet again, the advanced plating costs graphite dust, lead, tough alloy, and redstone. So yeah, that's way more annoying. But once you get an entire stack, the game gives you a half stack for free, so that you can complete the rest of the fusion reactor. This is the next major step in progress in this run, and the main reason I had to swap to cryo-stabilized flux ducts, because this thing takes up an unholy amount of power to run. After preparing everything, I made another 9x9 room, because that's the minimum required to build this fusion reactor, and it's actually pretty simple. You just have to build a giant ring of these fusion electromagnets, and it takes 96, or a stack and a half exactly. That's why it makes you build a stack and gives you half a stack for free. I don't even want to think about what would happen if they didn't give you the extra half stack. Anyways though, building it is relatively simple. I had to surround both the top and bottom parts with the cryo-stabilized flux ducts to power it, and I added a bunch of the tanks to store the inputs and outputs of the fusion reactor. The first major reaction we're going to be doing is hydrogen and hydrogen. You see, the fusion reactor has a bunch of different recipes, and it gives you both different products and different amounts of power per reaction. Since this is all I can really afford right now, it's going to be the one I'm going to do for a while. But it's also extremely useful because hydrogen and hydrogen produces both a ton of power and deuterium once it's up to speed. Deuterium is going to be the second reaction we're going to be doing, but that's quite a ways off because one of my major issues is still power. I pulled off all the stops I could to get this thing to work. As you can see here, I'm constantly running out of power right before it gets to the threshold of 8,000 kilokelvin. After upgrading my reactors a bit, I finally hit the threshold, and look at that beautiful plasma. Yes, I also changed the top layer to transparent ones because it looks so much cooler. And this is giving us our deuterium, and eventually, once it heats up even more, we'll get power out of this thing. But that's still a ways off. And I never understand how people can AFK, especially in games like this, because I go AFK for 1 minute and the reactor blows up. This is why I really hate fusion reactors. I don't know why it does this. I even had the explosions and meltdowns turned off in settings. I had them turned off for both fusion and fission, but only fission seems to work. So now I'm stuck with this mess. There is no way I'm going to remake all of those stupid fusion electromagnets. So, because this should not happen in my opinion, I really hate meltdowns, I'm just going to cheat in the rest of the electromagnets I need to repair this thing. Like, I really wish you didn't have to deal with this reactor because I really hate this thing. I can't stress that enough. One thing I'm doing to hopefully make sure this doesn't happen again is use these active fluid coolers and some infinite water sources to, fuel them. And this, as you would probably expect, helps cool the fusion reactor. And if you add enough of these, you can actually cool it past the heat it generates so it actually cools down instead of just stays stable or gains a tiny bit of heat instead. The thing is, you want this reactor to generate a certain amount of heat because a certain amount of heat lets it gain efficiency, and the higher efficiency, obviously, the more power you generate. So it's kind of a trade-off. The weird thing is, it didn't really have any problems after I installed these. It did explode one other time, but that's way later on, and that was actually my fault when it exploded that time. So yeah, these things definitely help out a ton, and they work best if they're on opposite sides of each other. So this is not a great design. I later changed it to have half on one side and half on the other. A while later, I checked back on it, and as you can see, it's finally generating power, and quite a bit of it. That is awesome, because now it can both power itself and anything else I need. For example, the arc furnace, so I don't have to rely on my fission reactors nearly as much. That is amazing. I love the power this thing generates, but not all the issues that come with it, and of course the fuel. Speaking of fuel, I'm actually almost out of hydrogen gas, which means it's time to swap to deuterium. Now this is where I can get what I need. Deuterium gives us quite a few byproducts. We get 500 millibuckets of hydrogen, tritium, and helium-3. But more importantly, we get 5, well, that's a very tiny bit, millibuckets of neutron fluid. But that is the most important output we need from this whole process, and the whole reason you need to build the fusion reactor in the first place. So a funny thing happened. I might have forgot to record when I first got the neutron fluid and turned it into glowstone, but yeah, I made the glowstone dust the mission wants you to do already. But anyways, it's a pretty simple process. You need a neutron irradiator, you add the neutron fluid and some molten redstone, which is easy to get, and boom, you get energized glowstone, which is, liquid glowstone, which is pretty awesome. This has a bunch of uses. The main one I'm going to use it for, though, is not the actual glowstone, although that has some uses. It's actually to make aluminum ingots. Not aluminum, but aluminum. I used the fluid infuser for this because I made some special tin silver alloy. It just skips a few steps in the annoying process. It skips me having to make the blend and put it into an induction smelter and everything like that. But this aluminum lets me make aluminum gears, which is useful for two important things. The first thing is the phytogenic insulator. Close enough. Basically, this is like a garden cloche, but thermodynamics, so it has quite a few uses. I have another thing to grow things with. I also learned that you can put the phyto grow in the garden cloche too, and it has the same effect. But yeah, now we can grow some more stuff without having to put like dirt or sand in it as well. Most importantly, we can also grow trees in here, if we ever need that again. More importantly though, we can finally make the Endurium upgrades. Yeah, I couldn't make those this entire time because I needed aluminum. That is one annoying thing about this mod pack. But now that I finally have that, I can improve all of my thermodynamics machines, which is great. Quite some time later, I finally ran out of all of the fuel for this fusion reactor, so it's about time I can finally turn this thing off and save quite a bit of power. For my next major project, I need an insane amount of poop. For this, I've made a basic setup that involves a hopper and a barrel. I have a hopper that puts the poop in, an infinite water source that imports the water, and it extracts the sewage into the tank. So automated, but not 100% automated. Also, because I can't have nice things, the fusion reactor blew up. Again. This is the third time now. I really hate this thing. I know I've said it multiple times before, but I do. Like, I can't even have it cool down properly anymore. I guess I should have just deconstructed the whole thing to make sure. For the next multi-block machine I'm gonna work on, I decided to recycle a bunch of the components from the original small compactor, which is now useless. And since these parts are so old, I have to upgrade quite a few of them because I'm going to need a massive amount of capacity for what I'm building next. If you couldn't tell by all the sewage earlier, this is going to be the pressure poop injector. This is a slightly complicated multi-block structure that allows us to make the next tiers of compact machines with a ton of sewage. So that's why I was making all of that sewage. You also need a tiny glitch machine, so I made one of those real quick, but even after it's all done and there's an item in there, it's still not working. And I realized what I did wrong. The fluid input hatch that I made was way too small, so I upgraded it by a few times and we're finally good. And it takes 32,000 millibuckets, or 32, poop, and sewage, to make one glitch large machine. And I need 6 of them, so I'll be here for a little bit. And building the next compact machine is extremely simple. Just 6 glitched ones and boom, there it is. This is the giant compact machine, the 11x11. But I am nowhere near done yet. I'm going straight for that maximum compact machine. And to make all of those large compact machines, I'm going to need gold, which you can conveniently get a variety of gold products from platinum pickaxes. This might have been a bit overkill as I got way too many gold blocks, but that was good for late game. The best part though was this notch apple. Remember when you could actually craft these? Those were the days. For the time being, the 11x11 compact machine is great because now I can put 2 of these miniaturization fields in here. This pretty much doubles and triples, if I use the one in the other room, my production speed. That's going to be super helpful considering how many of these I'm going to need. And of course, I'm going to need an unholy amount of sewage. So I built the maximum fluid input hatch so I could carry, 128 buckets of poop, or 128 poop. Yeah, I'm going to need an insane amount. The main reason I had to upgrade it is because the next tier, the giant compact machine to make the maximum compact machine, I need 6 glitch giants. And I believe they take like 64 sewage each. So yeah, I definitely had to upgrade the hatch if I wanted any hopes of making these things. And after all this time, the thing I've been working for in this entire run is the maximum compact machine. 13 by 13 by 13 blocks of space to work with. Obviously, it still has to craft and everything, but this is super exciting to get. Now that I have this room, I can do something special with the miniaturization field, and that is the 5x5 crafting, which is way better than the 3x3 crafting, because that gives you more options to build these compact machines, aka more efficient recipes, which is awesome. And of course it gives me other things to help with progression, including late game stuff like the wither skulls. But for now, I'm going to need an insane amount of wool to start making all of the different animals I'm going to need. And here's a great example of how powerful this 5x5 is. This is another maximum compact machine. And it is way cheaper than having to make 6 of those giant compact machines. This time I only needed 1, which is literally 1/6 the cost previously. So that is just insane. I love 5x5 crafting. And even though I'm not using any of the integrated dynamic stuff, I just decided to grow this tree here for the quest. Mostly because I could. I really could have just grown it in the thermal dynamics machine, because I had that ability now, but oh well, I did it. My next goal is to make a chicken. How do you make a chicken, you ask? Well, it's another multi-block structure, oddly enough. So, this requires a ton of wool and some different dyes, which are relatively easy to get. And yeah, you need to build it exactly how it says. So I'm gonna speed this up because it always takes me a while to figure out the exact placement of these multi-blocks? I mean, that's what they technically are. And the gray spots are just weird lighting bugs. There are no gray wool used in the chicken. This definitely wasn't the smartest placement of the chicken, But now that it's there, it'll eventually start producing eggs, which we need to spawn other mobs. Well, actually just the cow. I didn't make anything besides the cow and chicken in this run. Since I'm going to need a whole lot more hemp to make the string for the wool to make the cow, I decided to set up some more garden cloches. This production will also prove insanely useful later on, as I make way too much to use for now, but it will be insanely useful for some other materials I need. The only mildly annoying thing about making the cow is the amount of cocoa beans as brown dye that I'll need. Conveniently, they grow super fast when you're crouching, but I also forgot I could just use the photogenic insulator, however you pronounce the thing, to just grow them, but either way works. They're both pretty fast. The thing I haven't mentioned about building these animals yet is the fact you have to hold shift the entire time you build it so you don't accidentally use the wool on the floor, because you can pad these so that you don't get materials if you punch them with your hands, just so you don't accidentally hit them like I do a lot. But yeah, the cow isn't that bad. I just have to constantly check it so I know I'm placing everything properly. We need one of the eggs we got from a chicken, and boom, cow spawn egg. The only decent place I could think of for this cow that's even slightly fitting and not going to be super annoying is where all the coke furnaces are. I mean, he has some dirt, not grass, but still. Naturally, with all the buckets I had in my inventory, I milked him a ton, and this milk has a very interesting use. That is to make slime. The only issue is you also need mushrooms to do that, and I need to get those real quick. The game wants you to use the miniaturization field to make mushrooms, but I have ancient knowledge, and I have a plan. I'm sieving some dirt to get ancient spores. These are extremely important for my plan. And in the room where I make ender pearls, since I'm not really doing anything with the bottom layer, I decided I can give it some actual purpose. What I'm building in here, if you guys don't know what ancient spores do, well, they give you mycelium. Mycelium happens to grow mushrooms on top of it, but it also provides another purpose, which will be very useful for other stuff. When you put water in a barrel that has mycelium at the bottom, it converts into witch water. And with witch water, if you put sand in it, you get soul sand. That's how they intend for you to get soul sand in this mod, and a lot of other mods, actually. But soul sand has several uses, and most of them will be a bit later on, so I'll just have that ready for then. But I mostly did this for the mushrooms, and just to have it ready. The phytogenic insulator is very useful for duplicating your mushrooms, or growing more, but same thing pretty much. And with milk and mushrooms, we get slime. Don't know how it ended up in my other hand, but there we go. We get blocks of slime and mini slimes, which we can harvest for more slime balls. Which, I mean, I only use them to make emerald blocks, which, yeah, that's the entire goal of this. Before I get to building the emerald blocks out of the slime blocks, I'm going to need a whole lot more. So I automated the slime block production. And I didn't automate it later in the run, but I kind of wanted to. The only issue I'm facing is this. The pure amount of slimes it creates. Sure, there are maybe some ways I could have dealt with them, but I don't really know if there's a mob grinder in here, or I would just have to put fire on netherrack everywhere and burn them. But I don't want to do that because I want the slime balls. But there are no campfires like in later versions, so yeah, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do, and that ended up making me not automate emerald blocks, sadly. And these emerald blocks don't have many purposes, especially right now, but they'll come in slightly handy a bit later on. So this entire time, I've been making all of these different things because I'm working towards building the high impact compactor. The issue is that requires a ton of these expensive items. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I had to make slime as well, because I'm going to need the maximum, or whatever, ludicrous energy hatch, which is insanely expensive and it requires a ton of redstone and slime. But I have to say, I really like these unique recipes, like the impulse item ducts and these awesome tritium lamps. I think it's just a cool way to craft different items like this. And I love how the items look when they flow through an item duct, especially when it's like a perfect path like this. It's so cool. But don't let that distract you from the pain I'm currently going through of having to make way more crystal binder. Cause it's finally time that I actually need a ton of crystal binder that I was preparing for. The major issue is I still don't have anywhere near enough. So I kind of automated my whole setup here. I made sure that all I have to add is molten sulfur because I don't have another input for that without having to move the entire factory. And I've already explained how everything works. It now just comes with inputs and outputs. And yeah, it's all automated. The other major issue is I'm running out of magnesium. And that sucks because you can only get that from steel pickaxes, which give me all the other byproducts I don't really care about, so I'll have to sort those out later on. And I need all of that crystal binder to make the elite plating to make the rest of these superconducting electromagnets. Considering how expensive these things are to make, I really don't want to know what they're supposed to create normally. Are these for the fusion reactor, that complete abomination, or are they just for the next multi-block structure? With all of those ridiculous parts, I can finally begin construction on the high impact compactor. Now, it is insanely important that you know which way you're building this in, because it has to face the same way that your compact machine does. As you can see, I placed the power pipe, where the power pipe goes normally, where to build everything else in relation to that power pipe. That is going to be the back side, and all the other sides are pretty obvious then. I pretty much remember how to build all of this, and it's not extremely difficult at all. It's just the crazy price of the blocks to make it. That's the main issue. Also, don't forget the pipes, because the blueprint doesn't show them, but you do require them. And I'm not sure if you have to tunnel the liquid pipes, but I know you definitely have to tunnel the item pipes. And the power, obviously. Even though the high impact compactor is finished, you might see a slight problem. I don't have the ability to power it all the way. Even though I'm trying, you can see there's still some red electromagnets, meaning I'm not producing nearly enough. This thing just takes a ridiculous amount of power, so I'm going to go all out and make the most powerful reactor I have access to right now, without making crazy new materials. I also tried to make some new reactor fuel, but as you'll see here, that didn't go exactly as I planned. I didn't realize just how radioactive this stuff really is. It's just insane. I was only holding it for like a second and I died. Sure, I had gotten all of these other fuels, but still, I had no chance of surviving this. That was just crazy. So I'm really hoping that this final reactor upgrade will be all I need. I'm putting a ton of reactor cells together to get an insane amount of efficiency, and thus power, and to be able to fit as many coolers as possible to keep it, hopefully, relatively cool. Despite the 0.1 heat multiplier, it still produces an insane amount of heat because of the crazy efficiency. With that reactor upgrade, the high impact compactor is finally mostly powered. There's still some sort of issue with it. The larger issue is the fact that the power is only temporary, so I'm gonna have to do something else about it. But I'm really hoping I can squeeze out at least a few operations from this thing right now. Also, apparently it was the blueprint. You're not supposed to have the unpowered blueprint in there. Anyways, with that, I can finally start crafting diamond nuggets at a decent rate. Because normally you get a 20% chance per ingot, but with this you get 1 diamond nugget guaranteed from 3 hop graphite ingots. The larger issue though is the fact that I have to end the video here, because I was really hoping to make this just 2 parts, but with 10 more hours of footage left, yeah, it's gonna be a 3-part series. That's just how crazy this run was. The run was 80 hours in total, which, okay, for most people is pretty crazy. For me, that's not that bad. I'm kind of used to game runs that take that long. Like, for example, that's how long my current Satisfactory run is, and I've almost gotten to the final tiers before they change the map, so I'm just gonna make a new playthrough when they fully release, but that's all unrelated. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm hoping to get part 3 out by next weekend, Saturday or Sunday. It's taken me using all of the free time I have to barely scrape out one of these compact claustrophobia run videos a week, but I am trying my best. I'm really happy with how they've turned out. And especially thank you to all of my channel members. And this is going to be Enzo from LookIntoGaming signing out.